Hi everyone, I'm Isaac.
And I'm Cory.
And we're going to talk about movies.
And also eat chicken nuggets.
Yeah, I'm doing the intro today because Cory is currently enjoying a vast and delicious looking plate of chicken nuggets.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah, so don't everyone lose your shit because we swapped the order of our names. I know we have a lot of fans who are very privy to the details on these. We're not changing the official name of our podcast, so
considering how rigorously planned all of these are, I can understand.
Yes. How any small change to the formula might just completely alienate our listeners.
It's like 1 hour of podcast recording and like 20 hours of planning. It's a lot goes into this.
Yes, a whole lot goes into this. So please, we really need your money. But we both quit our jobs. Yeah. We're devoting all of our time to this, and our current income is $0.
Yes, we've been lying about how much money we make. We're not millionaires.
No.
On that note,
that is actually a perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about today. Bong Joon-ho's latest film, Parasite. This movie has been stirring up a lot of attention lately. That's putting it lightly. It won the Palme d'Or at this year's Cannes Film Festival on May 21st. I hope I'm pronouncing both of those French. Cannes? Yeah. Is it really Cannes? I always thought it was...
Could be wrong. That's what I thought it was. Could be wrong.
Cannes Film Festival on May 21st. There we go. And interestingly, I just learned this 15 minutes ago when I pulled up the Wikipedia page. Bong Joon-ho is the first Korean director to win that award ever.
Wow.
Which is a huge deal and is surprising considering the South Korean film renaissance of the last couple of decades. It's like not that new, and so
easily
it surprised
the last
me.
Two, yeah.
Yeah, it surprises me that they have not been recognized at that festival yet.
I'm sure they've had South Korean film showing,
definitely, but not winning. Which is, I don't know, maybe points to that festival being Eurocentric. I'd have to, although of course the Japanese film Shoplifters won last year, so maybe they're right now in the process of correcting their Eurocentrism. What other movies won in recent years? Shoplifters last year. The Square, right? It was Ruben Östlund, the Swedish director, who made Play. Play is a fantastic film. So that was Sweden, and then we had British, also, French, Turkish, French, American, Thailand, Austria, French, Romanian, Ireland, Belgium, USA, French, Italian, Denmark. That's 18 out of the 20 years are European countries.
Yeah,
or
that's
something.
Crazy, actually.
That is pretty wild. Yikes. I mean, I guess it is a European film festival, to be fair, but it's a global film festival.
It is.
So it's not like
it's been going
European.
on for over half a century, so...
And it's like the most prestigious one. I would just have thought that they would be a little bit more globally conscious, you know?
Yeah.
Although I guess the Oscars are pretty America-centric to an even more extreme degree, considering we don't even let movies made in other countries win our awards ever, except in the case of a movie like Roma that comes out every once in a while. And everyone's like, okay, this one's good enough that I think since we typically completely ignore all the movies from different countries, except in our foreign language film category, we should probably give this one some recognition so that people don't get mad at us for being insanely
it's
American.
Like, at least we have that one category that like lumps in all other countries.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is actually a good segue. The last one I was joking about, but this one I'm not. Okay. Parasite has a very good shot at winning that Oscar this year, the best foreign film,
an Oscar.
Sure. And I think it has a shot because of the amount of hype and attention that it's been receiving at actually getting a Best Picture nomination, which would be very interesting. Doesn't really say anything definite about the film's actual quality, but the amount of discussion that there's been about this movie, I wouldn't be surprised.
You can usually tell, or at least it makes sense as an afterthought. You're like, all of those had the sufficient amount of hype to be nominated as Best Picture.
But that is not to discredit this film. It is fantastic. Definitely in my top 5 movies of the year. So, Cory, my question for you is, Did Parasite deserve to win the Palme d'Or? Is this like a deserving first Korean film to ever win that major international film prize? I know that you're not an expert on South Korean film, but you know movies pretty well. So what's your take?
I think it is fitting because it just blends so many good filmmaking qualities together. You know, it's not just one thing. It's not just a drama. It's not just a comedy. It's not just even a specific subgenre of that. It's kind of in its own realm of movies made by Bong Joon-ho. Let's put it this way. If anyone was to win an award like that who is South Korean, it's probably him. Just because he has crossed international boundaries so heavily and so prolifically.
And successfully, right?
Yeah, and successfully. Exactly.
Not in terms of like huge box office hits. He hasn't actually really produced like a blockbuster, an American permeating blockbuster.
In terms of making films that are successful in the US without compromising
their Korean
right? Language, yes, the foreign film elements of them, right? Because in order for it to have a likelihood as a blockbuster, you pretty much have to take out as many of the like subtitle elements as possible, as many of the foreign film indicators, because that's just scary too.
Right, but yes, I agree. I think he's the most recognizable contemporary Korean director to international audiences, definitely. And I think that also he is one of the most famous, acclaimed, and influential directors currently working in South Korea. So Bong Joon-ho, let's talk a little bit about him before we dive into the meat and potatoes of Parasite.
But first, what do you think about this movie winning the Palme d'Or?
I think it deserves it. I mean, I didn't see all the movies that were nominated, but I think that, like you said, this was an honor that maybe already was owed to Bong Joon-ho because his past films that have not won it, including Memories of Murder, Mother, The Host being probably the three most acclaimed of his prior films.
The recent ones, Snowpiercer and Okja, both did well, if not receiving like the potential for awards or anything.
Right,
like
yeah, they were both definitely successful and I think captured the imaginations of a lot of people around the world. But they are a slightly different brand of movie than all of his others and Parasite, I think. Those two films still definitely have his mark on them, but they're a little bit pulpier, maybe is the right word. I love pulp movies, and I greatly enjoyed Snowpiercer. But just like, you know what I mean? The vibe is different, right?
Very.
The closest comparison in his prior filmography for me is Mother, which I told you about a little bit. And
yeah, I really want to see that now that I've heard about it from you.
It's a great movie. I think that Parasite is better, but Mother's a great movie. It has a similar kind of slightly comedic drama, maybe like dramatic comedy or like I don't know exactly how to characterize it, but like very funny. Hard to call it like a straight up comedy because the situations that are happening are pretty dramatic and there's a lot of intensity. And then it ultimately builds up to a climax that's pretty horrifying. So like they both have that arc, and they're also both pretty focused, small casts, character studies. I don't know if this one's a character study actually, but it's definitely focused on a very small.
I know exactly what you're saying because I've only seen The Host, Okja, and Snowpiercer of his movies. So I also was very drawn in by a smaller, closer, and more intimate cast, even though all of those movies are centered around one main person. They have this feeling that there's like a bigger, grander world that's also trying to be established, whereas Parasite is very much about the people and very much about their situations. And that same kind of ensemble thing that I think you're describing, that it's not about one person, but it's also not about everyone. Unless you're talking about metaphorically, because in a metaphorical sense, it kind of is about everyone.
Yeah. Okay, so that's like the subtext, right? Thematic subtext. Sorry, yeah. But in terms of what you're actually watching, say an example from an event that happens in the movie. So we're going to be spoiling it now.
Okay.
For anyone that hasn't already seen it. So at the climax, Mr. Kim ends up killing Mr. Park. Initially, to me, that seemed out of character for him, and I had to process it as we were walking out of the theater and we talked about it, right? That moment, you can read it in terms of its symbology, right? Like what it means in terms of the class commentary that's going on here in the movie.
Interestingly, more easy to grasp than a literal meaning about it.
Yes,
right?
than the literal meaning, right? But importantly, after some discussion, we were able to figure out a logical. It was definitely a moment of regressing to more base instincts. It was reactionary, but it made sense still in terms of the character that had been built up for Mr. Kim over the course of the film. And that's a very important point, I think, because even though there's these grander themes being tackled, definitely, the basic story being told here is so dramatically rich and compelling. And the characters, their interplay is wonderful. It's just so much fun to watch. Like, there's so much life in just the simple conversations of the movie and in watching the characters go through the shenanigans that they go through. Not just because of what they're doing, but because of like who they are. You just get the sense that this is a specific story with specific characters being told that needs to be told, and it is told wonderfully.
I think there was always the feeling, or at least the general understanding, that there was going to be some class commentary, some deeper themes, but I never felt distracted by that during the movie. I just felt connected to the situations that the characters were dealing with and took it in a literal sense with every step. I never got the sense that they were talking to the audience saying these platitudes, right? It was so embedded into the script and into the way it was filmed. I mean, even just like the comparison between the Park house and the Kim house, right? The dirty, claustrophobic, underground, basically one room living area, and the exquisite mansion of the Park family.
Right.
Like, even just that alone, upon looking at it, the giant gap between rich and poor, you know, it's very symbolic, but it's also just like a visually stunning difference going back and forth.
Yeah, but I really like what you said about it feeling embedded. It feels like it's sort of naturally a part of the story being told, as opposed to something being shoved down your throat. The myriad of contrasts that are depicted between the Kim family and the Park family, they creep up on you. Like, that moment when Kim kills Park at the end felt unnatural to me at first, but then as soon as I reflected on the whole experience that I had just had, what you're talking about, those visual contrasts that are drawn between the basement dwelling of the Kim family at the beginning and the Park mansion, and the little motifs that are seeded throughout the film, like the Mr. Park and everyone recognizing the distinct smell of the poorer family, and how that actually comes into very important play at the climax when Park smells the corpse of the skewered man and is repulsed by it in the same way that it's repulsed by Kim's stench, which you had, I think, really smartly related to Kim snapping and stabbing Park. There's a lot of details like that experientially watching the movie, you pick up on it as it's happening, but then you realize at the climax that Mr. Kim has also been picking up on all of that, right? Like, he has been absorbing all of these little aggressions and the class divide that affects him on a daily basis. Like, it doesn't just affect you as a viewer, it affects the characters too, without you even realizing it. But then, logically, it's completely understandable once you reflect on it. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does. Yeah. It's a massive psychological weight that is being put on Mr. Kim, as we'll keep calling him. There's this massive psychological weight being put on Mr. Kim that slowly is building up. You know that any moment something's going to break, right? Because it just starts out so well and they just con the family so effectively that as soon as this midpoint scene happens where they are seconds or like inches away from being found out and being confronted about it, you realize how much they have to go through on a daily basis to just live their lives and like survive their life. At the beginning, they depict that really well, giving you a taste of the hustle they have to go through, basically, for lack of a better word, the folding pizza boxes as a family and having their windows open to be fumigated rather than leaving their house. So, yeah, things like that.
And the way that whole ordeal is portrayed is very interesting, I think. The family is in destitute economic circumstances when we meet them, but you don't get the sense that they're unhappy necessarily. You definitely get the sense that they need more than they have.
Yeah.
But they have this familial camaraderie, and I don't know if it's exactly optimism, but it's at least like a sense of perseverance that just like, all right, well, like we got to keep living and doing this. And I don't know exactly what to make of that. I
think the turn happens when they realize what they have to do to maintain their status, basically, you know, their status even as the lowlings clinging off of the Park family, right? Their menial jobs, you know, they're all four of them being funded by the family in various ways, and realizing what they have to do to keep that con going. You know, the whole scene with the former housekeeper and ending with the daughter getting killed. You know, that's what makes the change. Feeling the toll that they are never going to get up to that point, and also combining that with what they're having to do to stay at that point that's like above a barely livable situation. Because that's where they are, right? They're still in the same house. They just happen to be having more money and doing it easier than they normally have.
Right, eating more pizza is what we see them doing, basically.
Yeah.
It's not like they are funding their...
Yeah, investing or,
getting up to live in another neighborhood.
Yeah, they're planning to ever have that amount of money themselves.
Right, no. The only thing that we ever see them gain from these jobs that they con the Park family into giving them is that one night when the Park family goes away to camp and the Kim family stays behind and basically parties in the Park mansion, right? That's like the one fruit of their labors, aside, I guess, from like a little romantic relationship for the son and money for all of the family members.
Yeah,
a creepy romantic relationship.
Combine that with the anxiety that they have trying to maintain that and knowing that at any moment they could get found out, right?
Yeah, like, is it even worth it?
Exactly,
kind of question, right?
It just basically like dawns on, especially on the dad and Kevin, who like both near the end of the film seem near the edge of a psychological breakdown. The son, Kevin, is like holding the rock that was given to them at the beginning of the movie, which is like a symbol of wealth coming to you.
He's sort of wanting it so bad and feeling, even though he's so close to it on a day-to-day basis, he's feeling completely removed from it. Right? Like
he asks at a crucial point his underage girlfriend, who lives in the house, who he tutors, he asks her, do I like fit in with these people? You know, it's both a literal statement of, do I belong here, mingling with the wealthy people, and also as a symbol of, can I ever get to that point, right? Can I, as the person that I am in the life that I've lived, not being able to go to college yet, or not, you know, just having to spend all of the little money you have on food and survival for your family, can he ever get to that point? And what would he have to do to make that happen, right? What horrors would he and terrors would he have to do? And more importantly, I think, inflict on other people. The crash for him comes from having to deal with the two other people and basically fighting them to near death to maintain their spot in the house.
That's a whole nother price that the Kim family has to pay that we haven't even touched on yet, is screwing over the people who are there the most similar to in the whole film, right? Like, those are the only two other characters of comparable status who have any kind of significant screen time over the course of the film, and the Kim family is just forced immediately into battle with them. As soon as their interests are at all at odds, the Kim family springs to action and locks them up and ends up actually killing the woman, the maid character.
Yeah.
And actually ultimately killing both of them, right? So, like, damn, that's pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
They have no chance, right? Like, in order to scrape by in the system that exists for them, they are forced to sell out their peers, which just perpetuates the system because it ensures that someone is getting screwed over.
Yes.
So it's just this impossible situation where the system is what's fucked up, and
you know that the Parks had to do that themselves. You're sure of it because Mr. Park is kind of a dick who like laughs at the question of asked if he loves his wife. Right?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, sure, you can say that. Fine, yeah. He dismisses the feeling of love towards his wife as like a trivial aspect of his life.
But interesting, he's not really though portrayed as like an outright villain.
No, he's not a villain. He's not a villain. He's just a normal rich dude, right?
And he is completely bought into that system.
As is the wife too, right? Like she is 100% in.
Yeah. And they're both like relatively nice to everyone that they interact with. You know, they're fair to their workers and their children and even each other. We don't really, they seem to have a pretty functional marriage. Yeah. It's like treated as if these are just the givens of having this lifestyle, right? Like, you of course will just not really love your wife, but it's just how it is, and like, look what I have instead. Like, I've got all this shit, right? I mean, it's treated in a very nuanced way, I guess is what I'm saying, as opposed to them just being like asshole rich people. Like, that's not at all the vibe.
It's very just the culture around it. The only one I think he really shows a level of affection to is probably his son, right? Which we're taking both families as a traditional setting. I think that's the sense that I got, right? With the kids living with and supporting the parents, and the dad, Mr. Park, talking about his wife being unable to cook and clean, right? So we're taking both of these as traditional-ish families, and in that sense,
I'd say the Kims are a little less traditional, considering they're kind of all four peers.
No, definitely less traditional. But anyway, in this setting, the son is the one that is the direct descendant, right, of the wealthy household. Like, that son is the one who is the heir, right? It's the one that he has to bring up the most, right? Or deal with the most to ensure that he can effectively take over his wealth.
Yeah, right.
Continue
so that he can
his
perpetuate
legacy.
his wealth,
Exactly.
right?
Yes. The dynasties of rich people,
Straight up, yeah. And interestingly, that is what he is protecting during the climax. He is sheltering his son and trying to get his son help because he prioritizes his son above all else. And the fact that he so heavily prioritizes his son over Kim's daughter
who's literally bleeding to death. As opposed to Park's son, who is fine, maybe just a little bit scared. I mean, he's traumatized, definitely. Granted, they hinted at that he might like have childhood seizures. So
right.
I mean, that's definitely
that's a good thing. Like, Park again here, he's not acting completely evil, but he is definitely acting in his own self-interest. And Kim notices that because he asks Kim for the car keys. Well, Kim is trying to help his daughter who's bleeding to death, and that's what makes him snap, basically, and kill Park. So it's that whole aspect of the heir being the number one priority comes into play at the most pivotal moment in the movie.
And I think there's two things going on with this realization of Mr. Kim at the end, right? It's that you were just talking about, and also just the futility of the entire situation, right? Like, he, as the main member of the household, which he's, like you said, he's not. They're all peers, and he is not the main provider, as tradition would suggest. But anyway, as the eldest man of the household, he is the protector, so to speak. And in that whole situation, and in the whole movie, to be honest, he is completely out of control with everything that's going on. And at the end, he's literally can do nothing to save his daughter's death.
Save her life.
Or save her from dying, yes. Combine that with the futility of his situation as a poor man and with a poor family, that, again, adds to that immense psychological weight. And no one cares, right? No one cares about his daughter and his family.
Right, everyone's rushing around Park.
Exactly.
They're just treated as on the same level as the other poor person is treated.
Yes,
the guy who comes up from the
homeless
basement,
dude,
who is like really no more homeless than the Kim family is,
exactly,
in a lot of ways. But he did try to kill a bunch of people, which I guess the Kims also did. But anyway, what's important is that they're perceived on the same plane, on the same level by Park, and presumably by all of the rich people. It's just like they're the rats scuttling around on the ground, which
that's
pretty extreme.
They all, they all kind of are pushing that through their heads at that point. Like initially, they're like, "Oh, we're scamming them off. They're so gullible," and it turns into, when the darker half comes, it turns into, are we the same as these people, right? Are we at the same level as human beings, right? Like we said, Kevin, the son, asks, "Do I fit in with these people?" And Mr. Park is seeing everything that's going around and seeing how his family is the same as the dude who is murdering them.
Yeah, and
in their eyes.
I think that's what makes Kim kill Park, is that realization that his family is considered worth less than the other people around him. It's the moment when that shift happens and he realizes that because of what's happening around him. His family thought they were being so crafty and smart, and now everything has fallen apart. And hey, who got the shit into the stick? It was Kim and his family. The son is bludgeoned with a boulder, and the daughter ends up stabbed through the heart. And the Parks are pretty much completely unscathed from the entire incident, right? So it's just that rage at who was affected by this chaos that drives Kim to that.
Yeah, exactly. It was a completely unnecessary thing to do, breaking out of that, right? And yet so powerful and so meaningful in the context of the film.
Mm-hmm.
As you said, like, we could hardly wrap our heads around a literal interpretation of it initially, because they seemed on such standard terms, right? Boss and driver terms.
Right. They don't seem like they are butting heads necessarily. Kim seems annoyed that Park maybe notices his smell.
It's like he treats him like he's a driver and a poor old man, but at the same time, Kim is scamming his family. So
morally, both sides are very gray here, right?
Exactly.
So what makes Kim snap isn't the morals of the situation. It's the fact that they're on such unequal playing ground to begin with. You realize that all those little annoyances they seem to be over the course of the movie that Kim had towards Park must have actually weighed, like you were saying earlier, so heavily on him. Like that weight builds up over the course of the movie so subtly that we didn't even notice it on our first viewing and had to talk about it to kind of realize what we had just watched.
Mm-hmm.
But so effectively once you have had that chance to think about it and put those pieces together.
So
Ben,
lot of
do you want
layers.
Your chair?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. We were having a really good conversation there. Everybody say hello to Ben. Ben's here from the Joker episode a couple weeks ago. So I talked a little bit earlier when I was comparing Parasite to Mother about the tonal shift.
Yeah, I think we were on our way there.
I do too. So we're going to get the rest of the way there now. The turning point sequence is where the Parks come home and almost find the Kims partying in their house, and it's this very intense and elaborately staged and choreographed and calculated scene where the Kims are just trying to cover their tracks manically as the Parks return to the house and repopulate it. It's a hilarious sequence. It's a very entertaining and tense sequence. Hits a lot of different notes. Interestingly, it hits, I think, notes that are more reminiscent of the first half and notes that are more reminiscent of the second. They're not really halves. I don't think that it's equal distribution, but
somewhere around there. I think that's fair to call it half.
And then the second half of the film, or the second part of the film, is the unraveling of everything that ends with the climax that we've already talked about a fair amount. And if you put a genre on that, it would probably be drama, maybe even like edging into horror, just because of
thriller,
the sheer
definitely.
Thriller. Yeah, probably not horror, probably more thriller at the climax, but brutal and does not pull punches. There's some bleakness there.
Yes. It lends well, especially to the script, I think, that the plot is just well structured to suit that and not feel disconnected in any way, right? It doesn't feel like all of a sudden we're in a different story or a different universe in order to logically flow and connect the two halves. You know the buildup is coming soon because in the comedy half at the beginning, everything is just going so well and their plans are executed perfectly with absolutely no negative effects to themselves. And you are thinking, they screwed over this lady, right?
The maid.
Yeah. And that was their one thing that they really had to like,
I don't know,
dive deep into.
I mean, they screwed over the driver too.
Oh, true. They even mentioned that. They were like, I'm sure he got a good job. Like, he's like a young dude, right?
Yeah, like I didn't personally actually even see the maid coming back. I didn't anticipate that before it happened. It almost felt like just a domino effect.
Regardless of that, you knew that something was going to turn.
Mm-hmm.
And what was unique about it was just how much it turned, right? How dark it took that turn. The tension is coming because it's playing with your expectations. The plot is leading you into a place that you know is building up tension because everything has just gone so well, and they can only go down from there, right? They're not going up from there. They're not joining this family. It's not going to be a happy ending. What they're doing is, like you said, we said already, morally shady, and that deserves consequence in movie logic, right? The people who win in movies are the ones that are morally driven the right way, or they have a moral shift partway through and realize the right way.
Of course, in this case, both parties are pretty morally gray, and so
exactly right. That's why when the night scene happens and everything turns, it just becomes so chaotic and so far off that you did not expect it at all.
Yeah, I thought that maybe the finale, given the tone of the first half of the movie, would be them getting found out by the family and it being this kind of whimsical approach. It does not go that way at all. Yes. It completely falls apart in the worst possible way.
Probably,
and I agree with that. That whole turning point sequence sells that unraveling really, really well. So, you want to talk about it? What actually...
Yeah, sure. So,
struck us about it?
Yeah, first of all, what literally happens, to remind people or tell people who have not seen it, when the maid comes back, we learn about her secret husband who is living in the hidden basement of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is that like just a strange plot device that ends up affecting the entire movie, I feel like that's a classic weird and wacky Bong Joon-ho point. Like, it just catches you by such surprise that you don't know where it's going.
Mm-hmm.
And the tension is coming from the expectations and knowing that something bad is going to happen in a minute. It's just, it's a ball coming tighter and tighter that's about to unravel. But at the same time, it's still like initially portrayed with such, like you said, whimsicalness. The layers keep peeling off and it just keeps becoming darker and darker. They fall down the stairs and get found out that they're scamming the family. The Kim
that's the
family
first person that finds out their secret is the maid and her husband.
Yeah, so they see that, and then all of a sudden they have the upper hand because the maid took a video of them and could send it at any second and screw them over to get the upper hand.
Screw the Kim family over.
Yeah, screw the Kim family. I should use more specifics about who I'm talking about. Then there's this kind of classic comedy of errors or comedy of manners.
Totally.
Coming together where the Park family's coming back in 8 minutes and, they have to
hide.
They have to hide everything and get everything in perfect working order and like get all of them out of the way. That ends up with a final scene where the mom of the Kim family kicks the maid down the stairs and kills her.
Right. Or actually, I don't think immediately kills her.
Fatally wounds her.
Head wounds her,
yes.
And up to that kick, it's still funny, right? Like, honestly, maybe that kick, if you had to pinpoint a turning point in the movie, was the turning point. Because the way it's
honestly,
framed,
to me, I mean, going down into the basement and, like, what the fuck is going on down here? Like,
that also throws you off, for sure. But it still has that Bong Joon-ho wackiness that...
Yeah, it's the layers, the peeling off,
Right, yeah,
and, like,
that's
with
a good
the
point.
family falling down and, like, falling all on top of each other. Like,
that is pretty comical still, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, you're right. There's not one turning point. It's really the layers, like you said, that are peeled away or added on, however you want to do the analogy.
Yeah.
But it's a great sequence, and it's one of those short time frame scenes that can be used incredibly effectively in films. It's not real time, but it's like one of those elongated one day or one night scenes. They're a pretty popular device. Tarantino did it earlier this summer in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Check out our episode on that.
Yeah.
That's our very first episode. It's a special one. And sometimes it can feel awkward. It can feel either slow because it's sort of day in the lifey, or it can feel unbelievable that so much shit is happening in the same day.
Yeah, like it could have, in the wrong hands, been poorly played off, for sure.
Right. No, but here it's just coordinated so well. The chain of events, on one hand, feels inevitable because, like you said, you know that it's going to fall apart somehow. But then just the way it falls apart is so unpredictable and off the wall and tense and funny. There's this mix of really entertaining factors that drives forward the film from just a in-the-moment dramatic exercise in comedy, drama, tension, and a interesting tonal bridge from the first portion of the film to the last portion of the film.
Yeah, it lends the movie a strange melding, like you said, of funniness, basically joy, because you're watching everything come together. Like, it just so exquisitely executed, like you said. There's a joy that you experience while at the same time having this very disturbing turn and a very dark finale. You can't forget the feelings you felt before, right? And it doesn't feel like it's like a fake out. It just blends it so well somehow.
Yeah. I think it's this gradual transition where in the beginning there's these chain reaction events that all work out so perfectly. And then in the middle, that night scene, there are these chain reaction events where, like, some of them work out according to plan and the Kims don't end up getting found out by the Parks, but obviously some shit goes wrong and some bad stuff goes down, like when they have to kick the maid down the stairs and lock the husband in the basement, and they all have to end up spending the night under the ottoman. Like, it's not nearly as smooth an exercise, but it still ends up working out, and the chain reaction is believable. And then the chain reaction of events is just a complete shit show nightmare where everything falls apart, right? The Jenga tower comes tumbling down. So it's like this transition of how well things end up working out.
That also plays into the expectations of how we have expected as a viewer seeing similar setups, how we think the movie is going to go. At that point in the film after the night would have been the time where the main character, they end up coming up with a plan or an idea that brings everything together in a positive way for themselves, for everyone, right? Whatever ends up happening, it sheds a positive light on the ending.
What plan are you referencing?
I'm talking about in a general comedy setting. There is some struggles, right? There's a midpoint area where things aren't really working out and everything that was going well in the beginning just kind of is falling apart. But something happens from the main character, whether they fix the wrong they did, whether everything ends up working out for them, just the general flow of that. And I think there was a crucial moment and a crucial speech, kind of mini speech, that Mr. Kim gives where he says, I'm not going to come up with a plan, basically. Like, we're done with plans, and I'm done with plans. And that moment was both indicative of their slow psychological unraveling, right? They're on the verge of breaking even farther. Instead of coming back together and fixing everything, they just keep spiraling out, right? It just keeps getting wider and wider, the margin of possibilities that they could possibly do to screw everything up.
Interesting. So, like, up to that point, it's a classic structure of a comedy, more or less, in terms of the tone.
Yeah, even with
story.
Even with some of the darkness, and you could probably had you cut some of it out, it probably would have been the classic ramp up into like a comedy, happy, positive ending.
Instead, it just goes the other way at that crucial turning point.
And I think the plan thing is one of those things, right? It's him saying at a crucial moment that, the best plan is one that you don't have, basically, right? It's no plan at all never disappoints. And I think he probably regretted those words after, when his daughter gets murdered. But they had every chance. They could have got out of it. They could have just said, we're leaving this house entirely. We are running away from this, and, we are getting out of it. And instead, they just went right back in like everything was fine. And they were like, okay, we're going to clean up the situation. They had a very loose idea with no realistic possibility of going anywhere, instead of the classic coming up with the idea that saves it, right? Coming up with some drive of themselves or some turn of fate that ends up.
Yeah, that makes the happy ending happen, basically.
And instead, the turn of fate is that everything that they contributed, the negativeness into the situation, ended up coming back on them tenfold, right? They lost everything.
They did.
And most important to them, besides their money, was just the fact that they were such a tight family. The fact that they were all in it together and all struggling it together. And when they lost the daughter and the dad to, having to hide from, because he's a murderer now, everything was gone, basically, for them.
The simplicity of that whole arc reminds me of Mother again. that also is a pretty straightforward story that focuses on one family who are very close together, and that follows a pretty formulaic arc for most of its runtime until a turning point where the film veers wildly off of the well-worn track, and also in that case devolves into chaos and heartbreak. It's so similar up to the point where you get the sense that this is Bong Joon-ho really tightening up an art form that he has already practiced before.
Yeah.
And I think that is a lot of why this film has received so much praise, is because it really does exude the confidence and craft of its director. He's experienced now. You know, he's like a master, ready to fully be in control of his craft. Every aspect of the film feels like it pulls from something that he's done before. Or doesn't necessarily directly pull from it, but is it at least material that he's experienced working with, but he just puts it all together into this narrative and thematic package that feels so thoughtfully constructed. It reminds me of The Favorite in terms of just like how well composed it is as a movie.
Yeah, it's like still has the mark of the director. It's not like all of a sudden they just came upon a masterpiece, right?
Like exactly how to build a masterpiece. Like, no. It's very distinctly a Bong Joon-ho movie.
Yeah.
Just like that was very distinctly a Yorgos Lanthimos movie, but they like sand the edges down enough to the point where it's just so smooth. It's such a cohesive product. It's so satisfying to watch. Oh, yeah.
And honestly, it could just be that he's always kind of had that, auteur vision, and for one reason or another, he wasn't quite able to bring it out, or all the other people working with him who also had to make important decisions about the movie brought a different aspect out that they thought might have been better. And maybe more and more as time goes on, he's just been able to put more of himself in the movie.
Or just he's gotten better at coordinating, the necessary machinery and manpower and creative might that goes into making a movie. Like, I don't know if it's necessarily for sure Bong Joon-ho becoming more of a control freak. It could just be Bong Joon-ho becoming a better director who can more accurately like oversee everything, because that is ultimately the director's job, isn't to like control it and like impose his vision on every detail. It's to guide the overarching ship of the film, the creative product, right?
You would know.
And well, hopefully I would know. I'm going to have to know. Yeah. But I guess just my point there being, there are still a lot of different voices that go into this movie, even though Bong Joon-ho wrote and directed it. And I think that that's just more credit to him as a creative visionary for being able to create such a cohesive product in a medium that is so cobbled together by different voices and perspectives, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I think that was basically what I was trying to say, although I like that you still lent the credit to him. We don't know for sure, right? We're just speculating whether he is controlling more elements or just knows how to handle all the same elements better. Either way, he's getting better.
We'd have to ask him to know for sure. Yeah. We're both speculating.
I mean, he is going to be on the next podcast, so the interview.
Gosh, yeah. How many times have we made that exact joke about how we're going to have some famous person on the podcast?
Or just someone trying to give us support or something that is very much not real.
Right. Maybe if we do Honey Boy next week, Shia will come into the studio. I feel like he's like a weird enough performance artist that he would come to some random ass podcast. And
that'd be cool.
He made that movie, The Peanut Butter Falcon.
Yeah, I saw that
kid who just wanted to make a movie, and like Shia like did that, and it's supposed to be really good. So
it is. It's good. It's very good.
You saw it?
Yeah.
Oh. You liked it?
Yeah, I liked it a lot. Oh, it's good. Was the director the person?
No, the kid, I think his name was Zach something. The kid with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Like, he had some creative force behind the movie. I don't know exactly what his role was.
I mean, that is just a shining story. Like, it's well executed, and the story itself is very heartfelt and very touching. And
much
really
like
good.
Parasite, heartfelt and touching.
Exactly. Reaches down into your core. Although, that actually brings me back surprisingly more than I thought it would. What was your take on the ending of Parasite?
Like the ending? What?
Yeah,
ending?
the ending. So after the murdering.
The part where it's Mr. Kim living in the basement?
Yeah, and just the whole conclusion and the final speech letter thing.
Yeah, I don't know. It had the feel of like an epilogue. The main arc of the film ends with the death of the daughter. Then we come back for just like an afterword a little bit. It doesn't dramatically change the tone. Again, it's not like a shift back to the tone of the first part of the movie or something. It still leaves you. It's still very dark. It's still pretty dire, and it leaves you. I don't think it like puts you in a tremendously different place than you would have been if that whole part had just been cut off at the end of the movie. But I do think it gives a nice. There's some neat symbolism to be gleaned there with the father ending up in the exact same position that the maid's husband was in, continuing to be a parasite to this family who has unknowingly now had, or like not the same family, but it's like the house has now unknowingly had a parasite there for the past however many years, and like it's going to continue into the foreseeable future. So that's kind of funny. The Morse code. Yeah, the Morse code's a motif. I hadn't really thought about what it evokes or implies. What do you think?
I just wonder about the hopefulness of the ending. Is he hopeful of his characters rising out and accomplishing their goals, or is he pessimistic?
Bong Joon-ho, you mean?
Yes, Bong Joon-ho, yes. Is he pessimistic about their ability to do so, or the ability of anyone to do so? Because it ends with saying, I'm going to get money and I'm going to buy that house and you're going to come out one day.
Right, but when we see him doing that, it's what ends up being a fantasy.
Exactly, that's why I'm wondering the exact tone of what he's trying to say, right? For a second, you're like, oh, it's going to work out. And then it flashes back that he actually is just still in that same situation. And
well, what I saw didn't make me feel that their odds were good of going and buying that house ultimately, right? Like, that definitely felt like it was a pipe dream type ending to me. I don't think Bong Joon-ho wanted to leave us on a note of optimism. I think if he wanted to leave us on a note of optimism, he wouldn't have had the film spiral out of control to the extent that it does. Like, you can't rectify the chaos and, like, tragedy of the climactic final scene with a note of optimism that maybe someday they'll be able to buy the house and, like, see their dad again, right? Like, all those characters are irrevocably, like, shaken by that experience, and there's no coming back from that in the end, right? Like, that family was destroyed. So I don't really view it as being optimistic. I view it as being a pretty dark ending, despite that small uptick or like hint of possible hope that we get at the end.
I'm wondering now if it maybe is about the perseverance that we talked about that comes in from the beginning of the film, right? The not feeling that you're in a dire and desolate situation and not letting that weigh on you.
It almost, though, feels like what we just watched in the movie makes that perseverance feel massively misplaced.
Exactly.
Right? Like, they had that perseverance, they exercised it to as extreme an extent as they were capable of. It led them to turmoil and sadness, and then they just, like, hop back up it and pick themselves up by the bootstraps. I don't think that what Bong Joon-ho is saying is second time's a charm.
Or maybe this might be darker. It is a necessity. If you don't have any shred of unrealistic optimism about your situation, then the situation's going to crush you because it's already on the verge of crushing you. And the only thing keeping you from that is your optimism.
Yeah. And maybe the optimism that the Kim son gets at the end of the film is partially owed to the brain damage that he sustains.
Yeah.
He actually wakes up from his coma laughing, and they make a comment about how, you know, it's like a result of the brain damage, basically.
At least, I mean, he seems lucid enough to narrate the ending.
He's lucid enough to narrate the ending, but it seems still, like maybe his optimism, his laughter, his happiness is like a warped result of that. He is able to persevere, but under typical circumstances, notwithstanding brain damage, the experience that he's just undergone would be enough to crush the will of a lot of people, right? Like, and maybe him in a slightly changed timeline.
Yeah, I mean, any of them. But they all just are used to surviving, right? Mm-hmm. It's not even perseverance. It's literally survival.
Mr. Kim, though, does have a degree of that unrealistic optimism as well, right? Like, he has enough of it to send out that letter via Morse code every single night. Sure. It's implied. So it's not just reserved to the brain damaged character, if we're being fair. So it's not like a completely desolate, dire ending of definitively stating that there's no reason for hope and that hope results in only sadness, right?
Yeah, it's a complex reading added to a very complex movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's fitting.
Oh, yeah. There are simple ingredients, simple premise, not very many characters, and goddamn, it does so much with it. Reminds me a little bit of Roma also, just because it's laser focused on this small family. It's about the dynamics within that family. And
their relationships to each other.
Their relationships to each other, and the relationships between the lower class and the upper class within the same family. God damn, it looks like if you are a non-American filmmaker who wants to gain the attention of the American film critic community, all you got to do is make a movie like that, and they'll flock to it.
More people should be making a movie like Roma and Parasite.
I guess so, yeah. They're both fantastic. I don't mean to downplay either, because they're both fantastic films and well-deserving of attention. Maybe the South Korean film industry will get more of the international attention that it deserves after the buzz surrounding this film. Hopefully Bong Joon-ho can also continue to achieve his vision.
It seemed like he nearly achieved that vision of multiculturalism in Okja. I already talked to you about this a little bit. It's so binarily focused on South Korea and the United States, right? And their relationship to each other in terms of, or not even their relationship to each other, but the interactions. It sheds a light on how the entire world interacts with nature, right? It's about a company making food, basically making genetically engineered animals that are primed for food, and then not treating them like real creatures, right? Treating them even more brutal than livestock. I guess even probably just in the same conditions that, you know, people treat cows and chickens and every kind of livestock. So, I mean, even though this kind of takes a step back from that, like, giant worldview, I think it's as or
Parasite
more...
does,
yes, Parasite, sorry. Even though that takes a step back from that, like, worldview, I think it says something about every country, because every country has class divide, and it's simpler, but as or more universal.
Yeah, you can see the relatability here. Crosses cultural lines, definitely. And that, I guess, is, you know, class conflict, inequality, and family dynamics are things that pretty much every culture around the world can relate to a certain extent, and they're really vividly and thoughtfully explored here by Bong Joon-ho.
Yeah, we talked about on the farewell episode the ability to cross cultural boundaries, right? Make a universal story out of something so culturally specific. I don't know if this movie is very culturally specific to South Korea. I don't know how accurate of a representation it is of life, but I mean, I'm getting the sense that it is, right? Just because it's so vividly depicted the dire situation that the poor people are in. But that, you know, you see that in every country. So that's why it's so universal. Mm-hmm. It's just that it is so well able to capture an idea.
It is.
And bring it to life.
The magic of the silver screen.
Yeah.
Imagination in images.
Yes.
Beautiful stuff, guys. Beautiful stuff. So, if you are listening to this, what do you think? Is Parasite fitting as the first South Korean winner of the Palme d'Or? Does it have a shot at Best Picture at the Oscars? And does it even matter what awards it's winning? Or should we just ignore the awards because they're all bullshit anyways and talk about the movie itself and how it relates to the world? Probably. I would err on the side of the third of those options.
Answering the question.
That's just me, though. So comment your stance on the topic.
I can't wait for the person who is like, this movie did not deserve an award. I want to argue with them. Like, this movie is pure shit.
Yeah, no, that one dude who gave it a rotten review on Rotten Tomatoes. Probably that guy Armand White who, like, gave, you know, all the Toy Story movies negative reviews and, like, every movie that. Yeah, he's just this, like, contrarian film critic who basically gives shitty reviews to like universal movies that are universally considered to be masterpieces and doesn't have good reasons for it. He just like does it for publicity's sake, basically.
And it worked.
And it works because I know his name. So God damn it, Armand White. Curses.
We should look up if he's the one who gave the negative review. I want to see what the negative review says on Rotten Tomatoes. So we're leaving the podcast going until we find out what it says.
Yeah, that's a good. We should.
But they'll probably upvote a movie that spends millions of dollars making Robert De Niro look semi-attractive and younger.
I mean, who wouldn't know?
There we go.
Yeah, there it is. Parasite, 99% approval rating on 259 reviews. I know Rotten Tomatoes is not a good. There's 2 rotten reviews. One of them is by Armand White, motherfucker.
Bong is an unfunny extremist. In Parasite, he annihilates the concept of... Okay, never mind. I don't want to include this in the podcast, but I'll read it anyway.
That's not even like... He's just describing what happens in the movie and giving it a rotten review and saying, okay, fuck you.
Also, what does it mean to annihilate the concept of a nuclear family?
I think he just means he's like being too extreme with it, like he's wrecking ball themes, kind of.
His goal is to upset that concept or something?
I don't know, but we're just giving this guy what he wants right now, I think.
Yeah, seriously. What did the other one say?
Deplorables, South Korea style. Though billed as a kind of South Korean anti-capitalism satire, this eat-the-rich outing, when not needing its own 21st century gladiator combat at the bottom of the economic food chain, comes off more as an empty plate. Huh.
Okay. I don't know.
Interesting. This one seems like a more legitimate criticism.
I think they might have missed what the movie was trying to say, but
at least they're not Armand Whiting it.
At least they're not Armand Whiting it, true.
But they are contrarian. Yeah, gotta love those bold people on Facebook who comment about how they didn't like that new movie that everyone liked.
Yeah, that's basically what that dude was doing. You weren't kidding.
Yeah. That's who Armand White is, but instead he posts on Rotten Tomatoes.
I just didn't think it was funny enough. That was literally like
that's what he said. Yeah.
He's not funny.
Okay, let's stop dropping his name. We're just giving him publicity, man.
Okay, we should cut most of that.
He who must not be named. All right, well, any last words?
No, but I think this was a fruitful discussion.
I do too. Hopefully our listeners do as well. So spread the word about us. We are About Movies. You can find our blog at aboutmoviesci.wordpress.com. You can find our link to our podcast from there. We're hosted on Podbean. Give us a subscribe on our blog and or our podcast, whichever one you're, gonna visit up more. And find us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, About Movies CI.
Yes. Critics, give us negative reviews so we can come back and throw it in your face.
Hey, yeah, give us that good
publicity.
Good publicity. All publicity is good publicity.
Exactly.
And we'll be on your turf soon because we're applying for the Rotten Tomatoes critic approval in March because we missed the one that happened like 2 weeks ago. God damn it.
Yeah. More than 2 weeks, but yeah. 1 month ago now. It's November.
Still bitter about that. All right. Anyways, thanks for listening, everyone. Let us know what you think. We would love to hear it. Yeah, cue that outro music. We'll be back for the next Bong hit in a few years.
Yeah, have a good one.
I did not win that term. I saw that.